Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Java Graphics. Today we're going to be continuing talking about animating shapes. In this video, we're going to show you how to animate a rectangle using the keyboard arrow keys. Now, if you missed the prior videos, I'm going to put a link in the description below so you can catch up on anything you may have missed. Anyway, let's get going. If you want to learn Java programming, or just programming in general, subscribe to this channel. We put out a lot of videos that range from beginner topics to more advanced programming concepts. Also, please like this video, share it with a friend, and write a comment as well. It goes a long way to help promote a channel like this. Now, let's get back to the video. Now, in the prior video, we had this yellow ball moving to the left across the screen. In this video, I've taken out the movement of the ball so we don't have any distractions and we can just focus on our rectangle. What did I do? Well, all I really did is comment out the ball.move call in loop. That way, we're not going to call move and we won't move the actual ball. So here we are in our rectangle class. I've created 4 instance variables, 2 for the position and 2 for the width and height. Here's my constructor. The constructor will be initializing the x and the y position to whatever's passed in, and the width and the height will start at 20 wide by 100 tall. In order to draw the rectangle, we need a method drawSelf, just like we had on the ball. So let's create one. There's our graphics object that's being passed in. Of course, I've already imported graphics and I've imported color, so I can actually draw my rectangle without having to do it later. So g.setColor. And if I'm not mistaken, the rectangle in the prior video was blue. So we'll write color.blue. And then what we'll do is we'll draw a rectangle. And we'll use fillRect method. And we'll pass in the x and the y coordinate, the width, and the height. And there is the rectangle drawing itself. The last thing we need to do is we need to come to our main class. And inside our paint component method, we need to tell the rectangle to draw itself. Now, I've already added all the preliminary code up here. I created my rectangle variable, my instance variable. I instantiated the rectangle here at position 100, 100. And in paint component, as you can see, I'm making sure that my rectangle has been created. And then I'm telling it to draw itself. Let's test. And there's our rectangle. So far, so good. Now we want to move the rectangle. So let's head over to rectangle. And let's create a method called move. And for now, let's just add 1 to x and 1 to y. So it should move down and to the right. Of course, we have to come to our main class, our driver class, and in the loop method, here's where we move the ball. Well, this time we want to move the rectangle. So 1/60th of a second, the rectangle will move 1 position right, 1 position down, and it'll continue. Let's just double check. And there it goes. All right, so far so good. But what we really want to do is we want to have the rectangle only move when the arrow keys are pressed. So let's think about how we can do that. Okay, so let's come back to our rectangle class. Now, as we said before, the rectangle is moving automatically, but we really don't want to move it automatically. We only want to move it under certain conditions. So we're going to create a couple of variables. We're going to create some variables that indicate which direction we're moving the rectangle. So let's create a variable here called Vx and Vy. These stand for velocity x and velocity y. In other words, how are we going to be moving it in the x direction and how are we going to be moving it in the y direction? Now initially, we're going to set those variables equal to 0, which indicates that the rectangle is not moving at all. And then in our move command, instead of adding 1 to x, we're going to say x plus equals Vx, y plus equals Vy. In other words, take x and change it by whichever direction it's moving. Take y and change it by whatever direction it's moving. Now, if we test this, the rectangle should not move because our velocities, as you can see up here, start out at 0. However, if I started the x velocity at, say, for example, 5, and the y velocity at 1, what's going to happen is the rectangle is going to start out by moving to the right, and down it's going to move a lot faster to the right, of course. And as you can see, there it is. Of course, if I want to make it move in the opposite direction, I can say -1, which means the y velocity starts going up by 1. And there it is. So now that I have these velocities set, let me change this back to 0 so it doesn't move at the start. All we want to do now is change these velocities based on what key was pressed. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a method here that allows us to change these velocities. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the direction as a string. Which direction should we move the rectangle? So we'll just make a decision. If the direction's up, then what are we going to do? We're going to change the y velocity. Velocity y is going to be equal to -1. And if the direction that we're going to be moving this rectangle is down, we're going to set the velocity equal to +1, which means we move it down. Of course, we want to do the same thing for the x. All right, and of course I made a mistake here. There should be a -1. There we go. So this method will allow us to change these velocities. If the rectangle should be moving up, we make the y velocity -1. If it should be moving down, the y velocity is +1. And of course, same with the x. Moving left, we're going to subtract from x. Moving right, we're going to add 1 to x. Of course, the only issue is that we're not using this method. When do we actually call this method? Well, we want to call this method when the person who's running our program presses one of the arrow keys. So let's head back to our main class and down to these methods. These are the methods that we said were required, but we really didn't use them yet. And they're required because we are implementing key listener and mouse listener. Well, we're interested in key listener for now. So let's scroll back down to the method called key pressed. Now this method will automatically get called anytime the person who's running your program presses any key on the keyboard. And this variable will contain information about which key was pressed. For example, there's a method on this variable, getKeyCode, and this will return an integer that tells you which key was actually pressed, so we can store it. So we have this now in the variable k, and now we're going to make a decision. If k is equal to 37, that represents the left arrow. 38 is the up arrow, 39 and 40 and so on. Now, of course, there's red lines here because I haven't finished writing this if statement, but notice that I don't have an else statement. I don't want to catch all because if the key is not one of the arrow keys, I don't want to do anything. So what do I want to do if I press the left arrow key? Well, I want to call this method arrow key pressed, and I want to tell the rectangle you should be moving to the left. So let's do that. And what's going to happen if I press the up arrow key? Well, I want to do the exact same thing, except I want to pass in up. And of course, I don't need these comments anymore because the comments are self-explanatory with the string that I'm passing in. And there we go. So let's just review what we're doing before we try and run this. When a key is pressed, we check to see if the key is either left, up, right, or down, and we pass in that appropriate value, that corresponding value, into arrow key pressed. In the rectangle, in this method, if it's either up or down, we change the y velocity. If it's either left or right, we change the x velocity. And then when we move our rectangle, we're not adding 1 or adding 5, we're changing it by whatever the velocity is, which can change based on the arrow keys that I press. All right, time to test. So here's our rectangle. I'm now going to press the right arrow key. 3, 2, 1, go. I'm holding it down. I've let go. And even though I've let go, the rectangle is still moving to the right. Of course, if I press the left arrow key now, it moves to the left. If I press down, if I press up, as you can see, it's moving in the appropriate direction. Now that's great, but let's say we really want the rectangle to work as follows. If you hold down the right arrow, it moves to the right. If you let go, it stops. If you hold down the up arrow, it moves up. If you let go, it stops. And if you hold down a combination, say the right and the up arrow, it'll move diagonally. But as soon as you let go, they stop. Well, for that, we have to change our design of the rectangle class just a little bit. Instead of having a velocity x and a velocity y, instead, we'll have Boolean variables, and they will keep track of whether we should be moving to the right, left, up, or down. And then we'll initialize them here to all false, which indicates the rectangle is not moving. Okay. Now, in our move command, instead of checking our velocities, instead of adding to the velocities, we're going to have a decision. We're going to say if move right, that means that x will be plus equals 1. If move left, and so on. So here you can see that we are moving the rectangle in the appropriate direction depending upon which Boolean is set to true. That's the move command. Now in the arrow key pressed, instead of changing our velocity to -1, if the up key was pressed, what we want to do is we want to change our Boolean equal to true. We'll say that move up should be true. Of course, down would be move down as true, and so on. Now the other thing is we really shouldn't be using else ifs here, because it's possible that the person using our program can press both the up and the down key simultaneously, in which case we really should set both of these variables. So let's take all of these else ifs away, and we'll just make them all if statements. Okay, so far so good. We're passing in a direction and we're setting the appropriate value. Let's double check and see if it works. I'm going to hit the right key. Oh, but I let go of it. I just let go of it and it didn't stop. Why didn't it stop? Well, let's check. We don't have any indication to say that a key has been released. We only have an indication to say that a key was pressed. So what we really want to do is we want to pass in another variable here, a Boolean, whether or not it was pressed. So if this value is true, that means that this key that we're passing in, up, down, left, right, is actually being pressed. So we want to set move up to true, move down to true, whichever one was pressed. However, if this variable is false, that means that the key is actually being released, in which case we want to change move up, move down, move left, move right, whichever one it is, to false. So instead of setting these to true, we're actually going to set these equal to the parameter that was passed in, either true or false. Now let's head over to the main class, the driver. And as you can see, these are now in red because we're not passing in the second parameter. We want to pass in true in each of these cases, which indicates that the key was pressed. And of course it was pressed because this is the method key pressed. Well, which method gets run when the key is released? Well, that's easy. Key released. So all we want to do is copy all of this code into the key released method. And here, 37 still means the left arrow, but it doesn't mean that the left arrow is being pressed. It means that the person is letting go of the left arrow. So in this case, we want to pass in false to tell the rectangle that the left arrow has just been released. And we change all of them as follows. So now let's just remind ourselves what we're doing here. When a key is pressed, we're telling the rectangle the left key was pressed. If the up arrow was pressed, we tell the rectangle the up key was pressed, and so on. If the left arrow was released, we tell the rectangle that the left arrow was released, and so on. And inside our rectangle class, we check to see which one was passed in, which key was either pressed or released. This will tell us whether it was pressed or released, and we set the appropriate movement Boolean. And the movement Booleans will control which direction the rectangle moves. So let's run it and see how it works. We have a stationary rectangle. I am pressing the right arrow. I am letting go of the right arrow now, and it stopped. I'll press it again. Now, while I'm holding it down, I'm going to press the down arrow. And now I'm going to let go of the down arrow, and I'm going to press it again, and so on. and now I'm going to press the left arrow. While I'm pressing the left arrow, I'm going to press up. I'm going to let go of up. I'm going to press up. I'm going to let go of left. I'll let go of both. Now, what happens if I press the right and the left arrow at the same time? Well, I'm going to press the right arrow now, and now I'm going to press the left arrow at the same time. As you can see, it's staying still. Now, why is it staying still? Well, because the left and the right arrow are both true, which means we're adding 1 to x, but then we're also subtracting 1 to x for a net change of 0. And that's basically it. We now have a graphical object that we can move using the keyboard. I hope you learned something from watching this video. Please remember to subscribe and share this video with others who are learning Java programming. Thanks for watching, and take care, everyone.